Most people who attended COP were astounded by the facilities. No effort was spared by the French government in setting this up. There were 6 gigantic halls off that covered walkway, which were apparently former aircraft hangars, each the size of a large high school. Together they contained 195 or so national pavilions, hundreds of NGO exhibits, dozens of meeting rooms, banks of computers supported by the IT department, and affordable restaurants in every hall. The full visitor services that were supplied meant that people who came in the morning, say around 8 or 9 o'clock, could stay all day without having to go out to do any business that they might have. There was a post office, there was a currency conversion office, ATM machines, a lost and found, and little restaurants and cafes and kiosks along the walkway. So you could do everything there. In fact, there was even a meditation room where you could go and lie down and rest. COP really walked the talk about low carbon emissions by providing such things as electric vehicles for rent. The electric vehicle charging stations were right there in front of the venue itself, and in the parking lot nearby there were electric buses which were in use by COP for all kinds of purposes. Here's a shot of the main covered walkway that connected all the halls and services, and including right in front here we see the post office and the lost and found in the middle. This walkway was often surging with people, so thick that you could hardly get through them. The next slide we see some wildlife artwork that lined the walkway. Off the walkway, in the great halls, were the many pavilions. These were all temporary structures and were made of particle board. In the next slide, you see the African pavilion, which hosted many panel discussions. All the discussions that were going on in COP were listed on great monitors, such as those that you would see in airports, with all the flights scrolling by. It was the same thing at COP. The discussions that were available at any given time were rolling by on these monitors, sometimes as many as 10 or 15 at a single time. There were about 1,350 NGOs at COP, and many of them needed exhibit facilities. Here we see an NGO exhibit booth, and in the next slide we see a picture of Robert Redford, who represented the NRDC at COP. There were computer banks in each of the great halls, with IT personnel right there on the spot in case you needed help. There were also blogging areas where long tables like this with plug-ins for if you had your own computer. So everybody was well served that way. There were also really good restaurants at almost any level that you might care to use at close hand outside the meeting rooms. And here is one in particular outside the main Seine Plenary Hall for those long hours when you need to come out and have a snack. The meeting facilities were really impressive. You can imagine by looking at this list that some of them would all have been needed at once. So the 2 large plenary rooms named after the great French rivers, Seine and Loire. This is the enormous Seine plenary room. It was the largest room in the venue, and you can see the great screens which show close-ups of the action, and the cameras in the middle, and there were actually 3 overflow rooms for this room, which were sometimes needed. 3 press conference rooms open to everyone most of the time. 12 observation rooms for government and NGO presentations, open to all NGOs and so on. And the negotiation rooms, which were closed to a certain level of high-level delegate. One of COP's main functions was to showcase the work on carbon emissions that was going on all around the world. So there were many governments and NGOs who wanted to give press conferences showing their work to the world. These were generally open, a few of them were not, but most of them were open to anybody who was at COP. And they were extremely interesting, and you could ask questions. Here's one of the press conferences from the Brazilian ambassador, which took place on December the 10th. That required press conference rooms. There was one very large one and two smaller ones, and press conferences were scheduled every 30 minutes, and you could see them on the big monitors out in the halls. To showcase more detailed meetings, there were 12 observation rooms for use by government and NGO presenters, which normally ran for 90 minutes. These weren't usually all running at once, but there was a lot of information given out, obviously, over the 2-week period. Most of it dealing with what is already happening in the world right now to counter climate change, and we don't hear much of this in the media. Outside every meeting, as you went in, there would be people standing with baskets of headphones. These were provided in all meetings to everyone, so theoretically there would be between 30 and 40,000 in use at any given time. Last, and perhaps not least, are the facilities that we all need from time to time, and they too were well organized and clean.